Hello, Michael here with a brief overview of a couple of cloud-based rendering solutions that I'm going to be looking at today for use with Renderman specifically. I've had a couple of people ask me about this. I've been working on a project at the moment where I'm using some render farms for some personal work, and I thought I'd share my experiences with two I've been using. I've been using Plow, that you'll see the website on the left there, and Zinc on the right there. I'm going to talk about Plow first though, so let's get into it. The first thing that the question will be on everyone's lips is pricing, and I'll talk about how we calculate that when you're talking about render farms. Essentially, the metric is based on gigahertz hours, and that's how long it would take 1 gigahertz processor to process a frame over the course of an hour, or how many hours it would take it for a 1 gigahertz processor to process it. So to calculate the cost of your render, what you'll need to know is how many frames are in your scene. So let's work with 100, well, let's work with 1 frame, for instance, so that'll be easy to sort of extrapolate out. The average render time for that frame, so per frame, if you had 100 frames in there, we're still talking per frame, so let's say 20 minutes. The number of CPU cores on your computer, mine's a quad core, it's an i7-6700K, so it's 4 cores. The number of CPU hyperthreads is 8. The speed in gigahertz is 4.0. It's not overclocked at the moment. And the power slider, this will indicate if you want to increase the speed. Essentially, you increase the power slider. We're going to keep it at 0.8, which is going to keep the budget very low. And we'll get our cost estimate down the bottom here. For 1 frame, it's going to cost you 4 cents. So if you extrapolate that to 100 frames, it's going to cost you $4. So that's really cheap. My total project is 2,500 frames. So you can see that if I was averaging 20 minutes a frame, that's only going to cost $90 to render the entire project, which is very reasonable, especially if you're not planning on making any money on it. It's incredibly cheap. In fact, the reason I went with Plow to start with was because it is the cheapest cloud-based rendering platform that I can find. If there is a cheaper one, let me know, or if there's one that's comparatively priced, let me know, because I would like to know about it as a point of comparison. So let's have a look at how it works to submit a scene. So when you open Plow, you'll get it in your in the bottom right corner of your system tray. So you can just right click on that and click submit job, and what will happen is you'll have to choose your application. So I'm using my 2016, and then you'll choose your scene file. If you haven't already submitted a scene from this project, it will need to upload all of your project files as well. So if I go to scenes and I go to scene 2, which I was just rendering recently, you'll see here job size is 0 bytes on disk. So it doesn't need to upload anything for me to render from the scene, because it's already held in cache on their cloud. What that means is I can keep rendering jobs from this project. So I'll only need to upload furthermore scenes rather than the whole project over and over, which is good because the project itself is, as you can see, 6 gigabytes. It's actually much less than that. I think it's only 2 gigabytes, but I might have some extraneous things in there. And that's also something worth noting, is I've had to create, or what I had to do was archive my project, so it just pulled all of the files that are in use out of the project file, and then I copied it to somewhere else on my computer so I could upload it, because with Plow, it just looks at your project folder and uploads everything. It doesn't care whether or not it's being used, or anything in your project file will be uploaded. So that's worth noting. If you're planning on using this render farm in the future, be very clean with your project file. Don't put anything else in there that you're not going to be using for the render. Keep it elsewhere on your computer, and delete anything that you're not using, or move it into archive. So yeah, you can see that there's not much in the project file itself. So yeah, basically what will happen is, I'll just render frame 1, and if I put a frame range set 1 to 100, you can also choose the rendering order. I render sequentially, and this becomes important. So for this example, I'm just going to render the 1 frame. I can change the output resolution if I want. It will pull all your render settings from your My file, so make sure you've got those set up already before you save the file. And make sure you've got your project set. That's really important for the render farm to be able to collect the files correctly, because it needs the pathing. The pathing also needs to not be absolute pathing, so that means it's just pointing within your scene itself. I'll show you what that looks like. So an absolute file structure would look like this. So you've got d:/ and then your path. What you need to have is a file structure which it's only pointing to within your folder, within your project, because you don't want to tell the render farm to look for a specific file on its computer, because it's not going to have, d:/ this, but it will have your project file. So it's just going to look in the local directory for that project. And also, while I'm here, you'll notice that I'm using Pixar texture nodes for my texture input nodes. That's because you'll need to actually convert all your textures to .tex, which is Renderman's texture file type that it uses by default, and actually converts automatically at render time all your textures to that texture type. However, it can't do that well on this farm, or at all, apparently, according to their documentation. So to save it from erroring out or rendering incorrectly, you'll need to do that. So make sure that you go through and convert all your textures to tex. If you don't know how to do that, I'll do a separate tutorial on that. Also, you've got the power level. The more you increase that, the faster it will render, but the more it will cost as well. And then you've got your animation budget goal. If you've put nothing in there, it will just render till it's done. If you put a limited budget in there, say $5, then it'll render until it hits the $5 mark. So you can sort of set a ceiling on it, and then it'll give you a warning and let you know that it's going to cost you more than $5, and it'll either ask you to cancel the project or increase the budget. So I'm actually going to render frames 1 to 5 here, and I'll just submit that so you can see what it looks like. So it doesn't really need to do any uploading. It's going to go through the motions, but it's not actually doing it. You'll see it's got frames rendered 0.5. That's cool, and I've got a budget of $5. It's not going to get anywhere near that though. This will probably cost like 20 cents or something like that. You've got farm load here. This the higher this gets, the more important power level becomes. If you increase your power level, you'll get priority. Whereas if you have a low power level, you won't have priority. I haven't had any issues with just keeping it at that. And because I'm not really under a deadline, it's not a big deal for me. I can render this to my heart's content, and I normally just sort of render it during the day while I'm either at my day job or when I'm asleep. Now, it will render away doing this, and this is all well and good. But you'll also need to keep in mind that you've got to download all these frames. Now, internet in Australia is really bad. I get about 8 megabits down on this computer, so that's about 1 megabyte per second, which when you're downloading, say, 100 frames where they're 200 megabytes each because they're OpenEXRs, that's going to take a little while, so make sure you factor that in. Also worth mentioning is that you can actually turn your computer off while it's rendering and turn it back on, and it will resume downloading or download the entire thing once it's done. However, one small annoyance that I have with this software is that it actually doesn't just have an exit button. You can't just straight up exit it. I can close this and it'll just be back in the system tray, which is kind of annoying. But you can alt control delete and kill it if you just want to keep working on your computer, and then reload it later on, say before you go to bed, so it's downloading overnight or whatever. And finally, the other thing that I've noticed with it is that intermittently, it will give an exception of no output. This can be incredibly frustrating. It just means it will stop rendering. It's something to do with Renderman according to their frequently asked questions. It's just something that they have to manually override and restart. I have noticed on this particular scene, I had 178 frames in this scene, and it had a no output exception, and then once they restarted and it finished rendering, it actually ended up missing like 20 frames, which I had to go through and manually re-render. And now that it's rendering, I'll just show you what's happening. So I've got show logs. If I click that button, it'll show what's going on, and I'll just point out what's happening just in case you were worried it's not in fact rendering. It'll show 0% until one of the frames is actually completed. So I've got 5 frames here. Once one frame is completed, it will show a percentage of 20%, which is 1/5. To check that it is in fact rendering, just look for this here. Basically what this is telling you is that it's rendered frames 1 through 15 but to refresh this, you'll need to close this window and reopen it. Yeah, you'll see that it's rendering all those 3 frames at once. And this will probably take about 20 minutes to render all 5 of these frames, maybe slightly more, which is pretty good when you consider that 1 frame was taking me 20 minutes on my home system, and it would lock up my computer. I couldn't do any work on it while it was rendering, obviously, because the CPU was under load. So that will save you a lot of heartache, essentially. It just allows another computer to take care of the work while you continue to do whatever you want on the computer, which is, in my case, usually more work. Oh yes, and finally, before I wrap up on this one other weird thing I noticed was that for some reason, sometimes I would download frames and elements would be missing. It tended to be elements that weren't animated for some reason. It's like the frame had been tile split and it had just only rendered the character that was in motion and maybe a couple of other background elements that were also had some minor animation to them. I'm not sure what this is all about. I haven't sent a support email to them. But yeah, that's just something else I've noticed, and it's actually been really annoying to have to go through my frames and check the ones that aren't rendered correctly. They're very easy to figure out which ones it is. I'd show you, but I've already deleted them all, unfortunately. But it's pretty easy to figure out which ones are which, because you'll see the file size is significantly smaller than the correct fully rendered file size. So let's have a look at Zinc now. So Zinc actually has a Maya plugin, which is really cool. Which hooks up with your with the renderer directly. You'll also need to have to run some software on your computer, so you'll run the Zinc desktop app, and of course there's an update, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to log in, and there's a couple of things that are happening. Hopefully those files aren't downloading, because I do not want to be downloading any files currently, but I'll close that in a second if they are. So basically you got your login page, you got transfers, which is what's currently downloading, or uploading if you're uploading a scene. And configuration just gives you the option of changing how many transfers can happen at once. And you've got this log, which tells me that it is in fact downloading these, which is not ideal because I don't want that, but whatever, I'll deal with that in a moment. Also, so yeah, we'll go back here into Maya, we'll have a look at what it's like to submit a scene. So if you click the plugin button, it will eventually bring up a window. So how this works is you could do upload only if you just wanted to upload a project or a scene. I think actually not only projects. I think you have to upload the scene every time from memory. It's been a hot minute since I've done this. Sorry. So you could select that if you want to do it upload only. Ignore missing plugin errors is something I would select if you're doing this. And you've also got up the top here, which is going to determine the price, the number of machines and the machine type. Now, my recommendation is, after doing it, if you're looking for the budget version, you want to use the 32 virtual computers. Between these two, there is actually, this ends up costing more for no advantage from what I've tried. So it's meant to be a faster version, but the 32 virtual computer ones is actually the fastest that I've found and the cheapest, and the preemptible version is the one that you want. Preemptible just means that you're using extra computers that they've got on at the time of render, which means if a priority job comes in, they will take that computer and they'll cancel the render of that frame at the time of render. So if you've got a big frame that you're rendering, say it costs 2 hours or something on your test render, you probably want to make sure you're using the non-preemptible ones. Otherwise, if you're happy to lose that frame, like it's only going to cost like $1 or something, or 30 cents or something to that effect, that's fine. Number of machines I set to 50, so it's 50 nodes, which means it's going to render really quick. It's going to render all, say if I had 50 frames, it will render all 50 frames at the same time. I'll sort of download them obviously on my incredibly bad internet, but that is sort of the cost doesn't get any cheaper to use just one node. It will still cost about the same. Project file, set your project file obviously, and output directory is just where the frames are going to be delivered. Frame range, you can do a frame range. You could do say 1, 5, 10, 17, 21 if you just want to do specific frames. Chunk size I'd set to 1. It just means that each render chunk is going to be 1 frame. So if you lose that chunk, especially on the preemptible systems, you'll only lose 1 frame rather than 10. Render layers, just select a render layer, and then launch job. I'm not going to launch a job because this one is actually quite a bit more expensive, which I'll go over now. So this is what the Zinc Web Console looks like. This is what you'll be using to monitor your jobs. Essentially, I've got a bunch of jobs here that you can see on the left, which have been either finished or cancelled or whatever. And on the right here, you'll see some information about them. So you'll see the amount of frames that I've got there. If I just change this to say 50, you'll see all 50 frames. This is the one that's actually currently downloading, so I'm actually going to kill that now. Because I don't need to download it, and you'll see that it gives you this error because the client app isn't running. It can't obviously download anything. It will still render, and it will still hold your frames rendered in a cache, which will cost you money per day to save. I forgot to mention this with Pixel Plow. Pixel Plow will also do the same. It's 1 cent per gigabyte on Pixel Plow. I'm not sure exactly what it's costing on this. It's about $1.20 per day on this one though. So on Pixel Plow is 6 cents a day, and on this it's about $1. So this is obviously more expensive. I'm not sure how big my cache is though. This is including all my rendered frames, which is quite a lot of data. Whereas on Pixel Plow, it's not your rendered frames. They discard them once they're downloaded. So yeah, you can go through and select if I wanted to re-download these, I could re-download them or re-queue them if I wanted to re-render them, which is nice. It's very handy. It's very easy to use. I'll go to my account and look at the price. So actually, yeah, you can see my disk usage here is 166 gig, which is with all the frames. So that's probably 1 cent per gig as well per day, which is $1.60. If you have a look at my usage here, you'll see that I'm using the 32 virtual computer more than any of the other ones. That's because this one turns out to be the cheapest. In my use case, that's what I've found when using 50 nodes and rendering frames that are ranging between 20 minutes to 30 minutes per frame on my computer. This is the difficult thing with Zinc, is that there's no real good way to test how much it's going to cost without rendering a test frame. So you will have to submit a frame and then sort of extrapolate the price from that. So if it was 1 frame and the frame costs $3 and you multiply that by 100 frames, it's going to cost $300. I'll show you a comparison here of a couple of the rendering prices. So this one here is the 64 virtual computer, which is 64 virtual computers at 128 gigabytes on the preemptible, and that costs $60. That was 100 frames. I rendered the same shot with 150 frames, but 100 frames later, and that cost $25. So you can see there's a relatively high price saving for using that versus that one there. And I know this one's meant to be an alpha, but it's certainly worth noting that if you're going to be rendering, particularly with Renderman, you might want to bear that in mind. Test this one out. I think the 32 virtual computer one is actually the way to go. I also tried the 16 virtual computer, the 8, and you can see that one there is $32.44. That was only 50 frames of a similar shot to this one here. So once again, that one turned out to be the cheapest overall for me. And yeah, you can see it's costing $1.10 per day to hold the cache. So, not particularly expensive when you consider the amount of data that's being held. And I can go back and download any of those frames again if I need to, but I don't. And finally, also worth noting, if you want to try out Zinc, there's actually a free $300 trial. You will need to have a credit card, but it hasn't cost me anything yet to use this for my project. So I think I've used like $225 or something to that effect. Yes, $225 so far, but at this stage I'm going to keep using Pixel Plow just for the cost, because this $225, if I'd actually spent $225 on Pixel Plow, I would have been able to render my entire project probably twice. This is in US dollars as well. And on Pixel Plow so far, I think I've rendered about let's say about 1,500 frames, and I think it's probably only cost me $80, forgiving any and all errors that I may have had with elements that I didn't check before I rendered out 100 frames or something like that. And I was talking before about the price calculation. So if you do submit a test render, you can just use this. So I would have used the 32 gigabyte. We can say I was using Renderman for Maya. I rendered 1 test frames. It cost 20 minutes to render, and total frames in the job was 1. And then I can change that to preemptible, and then we can add that to the estimate. So that 1 frame would have cost 26 cents. So when you compare it to Pixel Plow, it works out to be about 6 times more expensive, which is not insignificant. Now that said, I find Zinc very easy to use, and the submission process is very nice and it's very flexible. I do like it quite a lot. The problem being that it is just possibly prohibitively expensive on a small scale. On a large scale, I think I would prefer it over Pixel Plow if there was a budget for it. If you were in a sort of, if it was more for like a big advertising job or something like that, particularly if you needed it rendered and done quite quickly, Zinc is a bit faster overall because you can run 50 renders at a time versus Pixel Plow's average of 3 at the low end. So yeah, that's worth keeping in mind. But that's pretty much all I've got to say about the two. If you've got any questions about the process, feel free to drop me a line. However, I won't be accepting any technical questions. These two businesses make money, therefore I'm not going to help them make money. So if you've got questions for them about the process, you're probably better to ask them. But I'm happy to share my experiences with the two, and sort of, yeah, my recommendation is try Zinc out for the $300 that they give you to trial it. But also Pixel Plow is definitely the cheaper option overall. It has a few downfalls like I explained earlier, but it's definitely forgivable for the extremely low price that they're offering. If anyone else out there has any recommendations for Renderman based rendering, cloud based rendering, I'd be interested in hearing about it. If you've got experience as well, let me know in the comments. I would like to check them out as well, just for my future reference as well, and maybe I could go over in another video as well. That's it for this one though. I hope you liked the video. Sorry it was very talky unlike my other videos, but I just thought I talked to a few people on the Facebook, which if you haven't followed it already, link in the description. They were interested in knowing about it as well. If you haven't already subscribed, check out the channel. I do a couple of tutorials every week for things like Renderman and Maya and other CG products. So if you want to stay up to date with that, make sure you're subscribed. Otherwise, if you liked this video and you found it useful, make sure you click the like button. That's it for now though. Thank you very much for watching, and happy rendering on Render Farms.